I moved to the Willamette Valley with my parents and brothers when I was 16 years old. I graduated then from Corvallis High School and from Oregon State University in Corvallis. I'm a writer, but I was not an English major. In fact, I wasn't very interested in creative writing for many, many years. I got married in Corvallis in 1991 and left for 18 years. I lived a few different places in the United States, also overseas, and just came back to Oregon in 2009. So I've been back for 9 years, which is also the age of our festival. 2009 was the first year that the Terroir Creative Writing Festival was held. Planning was going on, of course, the year prior. So we're celebrating the 9th anniversary and looking forward to the Big 10 next year. We started talking, started dreaming a little. You should expect some interesting changes and some big things for next year for our 10th anniversary. On the boards, I believe, the whiteboards behind me are written some information, the Wi-Fi password. Go to the CCC visitor connection, and I don't know what the heck that word is, so write it down. Look it up if you want and inform me of its definition later, or perhaps it just follows the rules of English words and isn't a word at all, I'm not really sure. There's also a Twitter hashtag if you want to tweet. Feel free to do that. Take some pictures. That'd be nice to see those tweeted out. You have all received, I hope, a folder, registration folder. If not, you can pop out to the front desk at a convenient time to register. That has a lot of goodies in it, including an evaluation form. So note that evaluation form and keep it handy so that you fill it out before the end of the day. As we go into the 10th year, we would love to have your feedback on what things were like this year. And we'll have a basket in the front area, probably starting about 3:30, then you can pop those in. Or you can just fold it and leave it on a table if you need to leave sooner. Your schedule is also, of course, in the folder. We're adding readings this year, and those are held in various locations. We're in 3 different upstairs classrooms. There are bathrooms located on each floor down the hall near the elevator. You can also take some secret stairs on the other corridor end, and I just told another introvert this secret earlier this morning, but there are some quiet lounges around campus, and I won't tell you where the secret one is that I told my introvert friend about, but you can find some quiet places to sit, including down the hall, the cafeteria, including actually the self-publishing lounge, which is just past the elevators on your right. It's a nice little room. You can peek through the glass doors if you're feeling a little intimidated and see the very kind people in there. Just pop in and take a look at the books. You don't have to talk to anybody, but probably they will try to talk to you. We're not going to force you to self-publish if you go in there, but you can look for some examples of work. I self-published a small book on writing craft about 3 or 4 years ago, just because I thought, why not? I've published traditionally. I wanted to try my hand at self-publishing, and I learned a lot, and now I have this extra book lying around, which is kind of fun. So take a look in there as you have time throughout the day. But check back. Authors are going to be there. Publishers are going to be there at different times during the day. And want to make sure to mention the trash cans are across the back of the room. We have recyclable, compostable. You guys live in the Willamette Valley, you know what that means. But the coffee cups you're drinking about, you would think would be compostable or recyclable, but they're not. They go straight into landfill. So, take out your handy-dandy little free pen. You got one to write your name on that coffee cup, so you can reuse it throughout the day, and then make sure you pop it into landfill at the end of the day.
Next year, bring your own cup.
Hey, next year, bring your own cup. Yeah, thanks, Betsy. And Caroline O'Brien, who is just stood up, is in the back of the room. She's going to be filming today. She's from our local cable access TV station. Speakers, she will be asking permission before she records any portions of your workshops or readings. And guests, she may approach you with a request for a brief interview, or maybe not. I mean, she's really not that intimidating of a lady. If you would like to do a brief interview with her, though, you could certainly approach her. If not, just avoid eye contact. She's not going to keep you from enjoying yourself. She's pretty chill, this Caroline lady. Caroline's program is literally literary on McMinnville Community Media, so that's MCM, that's channel 11 on Comcast Infinity and channel 29 on Frontier Fios. 3rd Street Books is running our book table out front, and Scylla is a big blessing to us every year as she collects up the books, runs the sales, and she really does this as out of her love for writing, for reading, and for the festival. So we're thankful for her, and also check out the book table authors. I can't remember if I told you this via email, so this is a double announcement for speakers and attendees. Authors immediately after their session will be coming down to the book table to sign books. So if you want to get a book signed, you can either buy it before the session and ask the author to sign it, you know, kind of early, or maybe while in the elevator. No, let's say don't do that. Come on down to the book table afterwards, buy a book, and have them sign it immediately after their readings. We have raffle baskets on the table straight back from the door. This helps us raise money for next year. All the items in those raffle baskets were donated by committee members, by local writers and businesses. I think there are 4 beautiful baskets out there: wine, maybe some chocolate, gift certificates, books, and those are just $5 a raffle ticket. So buy a raffle ticket, put your name on it or somebody else's, and if you want to surprise them, that's always fun. At the end of the day, we're having our traditional open mic, but it's a little different this year. We want to really keep it energized at the end of the day. So there will be a 1-page limit. As you're choosing what to read at the end of the day, choose a page or even less. Keep us wanting more, and we're going to just go right through those very quickly. There is a sign-up sheet. Steve or Lynn, where's the sign-up? On the main table, a sign-up sheet for the open mic. So I'll remind you again at noon, but make sure to sign up for that. If you did not bring or buy a lunch, we may have some extra sandwiches left over at noon. We can't say yet for sure, but check back at the lunch hour if you want to save yourself a trip to McDonald's. Otherwise, McDonald's, I think, is the only place you can get to and get back before the end of that lunch hour.
The diner is right across.
And the diner across the street that I have never heard of. Is that near McDonald's?
That's right across from the hospital.
Okay, diner, and there's probably a hospital dining service as well. Okay, I'm almost done, you guys. Our committee meets almost monthly, starting in the fall, sometimes twice a month here toward the end. And usually about January or February, we have to cancel a meeting because of ice or snow. Almost every year this happens. Well, we got our ice on Christmas Eve this year. I should know because it took me 3.5 hours to get to the Portland airport on Christmas Eve. And we didn't have to cancel any meetings. We had our January 10th meeting, but then just a little over a week later, we got the news that we had lost Ursula Le Guin, who died on January 22nd. As many of you know, Ursula helped get the Terroir Creative Writing Festival off the ground. She was a speaker at the festival in 2010. Since Ursula was so important to our festival, and because this is our first year without her, Barbara Drake is going to come to the platform now, wherever Barbara is. Oh, Barbara's right here. Barbara Drake. Barbara is the matriarch of the festival, and we all bow down to her. And she's going to open our time together this morning with Ursula's words, a poem.
When we invited Ursula to be our keynote speaker at the first festival, we said, could you do a workshop on theory of fiction or something like that? And of course, when it came back, it was Making Up Stories was her title, which was more like her. Can you hear me out with the speaker?
You took the mic to your mouth, please. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so she gave the keynote as Making Up Stories, and Making Up Stories was her love. And when she knew that she was not going to live too much longer, she did a lot of work on her work organizing it for later, and she left this short poem. A Last Request by Ursula. Dear friends, what goes with me is old, used up, worn out, a story told. The best of me is what I leave behind. My children, never only mine. My books, which now are wholly yours. They hold what good I had to give. May it be strong in them to live. I ask you care to see that it endures. So we can all keep reading her books. She left actually a new manuscript of poetry that hasn't been published and some other things. It was on her bedside when she died, and her work will certainly go on. Thank you.
So remember how I'm from Corvallis? Well, our keynote speaker, Tracy Daugherty, is from Corvallis, too. We didn't go to high school together, and I suspect Tracy was an English major and did a little better than I did, because he went on to be a professor of English and creative writing. Oh, sorry, Tracy. Not just a professor, according to the Oregon State University, but distinguished professor of English and creative writing. Tracy not only has a bunch of big deal books, 3 about super famous people like Joan Didion, Joseph Heller, and novelist Donald Barthelme. In addition to the full shelf of books he's written, Tracy writes for The New Yorker, McSweeney's, and others. His biography of Joan Didion, Let Us Build a City, is a finalist for the Oregon Book Award this year, and should he win, this will be his 6th Oregon Book Award. But here's the cool thing. He's not at all pompous, and in fact, he never draws attention to himself. I met Tracy at one of my first readings for my little tiny book of essays from a small press, reading in Corvallis years ago. I was nervous and anxious and acting a little bit larger than life, as I may tend to do. And this guy comes up to me and starts asking me questions about the Middle East. Doesn't say a thing about his own work, nothing boastful at all, but really made me feel at home that nervous evening. So thank you for that, Tracy. And we are so glad to have you at the Terroir Creative Writing Festival. Friends, welcome Tracy Daugherty.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning. I'm honored to be able to say a few words to get us all started today. Last year, at about this time, my wife and I spent a couple of days in Ravenna, Italy, where the great poet Dante Alighieri is buried. At the time, I'd been rereading the Divine Comedy and wondering how Dante got into his poem so much information and so many fields of human knowledge and experience, science, religion, art, politics, history. Even the most dedicated Dante scholars shake their heads when confronted with this problem. How did he do it? He was simply gifted, they say, blessed with an unusual amount of inspiration. Which begs the question, what is the nature of inspiration? And how can we get some of it? Before going any further, I want to warn you, be careful which writers you read. I discovered that if you're planning to visit Italy and you read Rick Steves' popular travel guides beforehand, you might end up skipping Ravenna. Steves dismisses the city outright. It's of little interest to tourists, he says. It's an industrial wasteland. But in fact, the inner city, where cars are banned, fully maintains its ancient charm. But obviously that fact was lost on the uninspired travel writer. But I want to talk about being inspired, a state in which I found myself that first morning in Ravenna. I lay in bed, breathing the thin air. Dawn light broke through the pine trees, stirring outside our hotel window at about 4 o'clock. And because of the lack of cars, the whistling of the waking birds carried throughout the entire city. I heard sounds I had never heard before, species that were unknown to me. It was, literally, the discovery of a new world, an experience that made me alert for more discoveries, the ecstatic and vulnerable openness that's necessary to invite inspiration. Among the unfamiliar calls in the air that morning, I could, just barely, identify the trill of mourning doves, larks, the cackle of mockingbirds. These were species I had known as a boy in West Texas. I peered through the pines and glimpsed scruffy black feathers, a sleek white tail twitching in the tree limbs. My wife identified this as a magpie. I had never seen a magpie. I tried to remember what I'd heard about them. I knew they had a reputation for stealing bright, shiny things wherever they could find them, from meadows and fields and parking lots. They were hoarders and thieves, plucking bits and pieces from the world. Which, because the poem already filled my head, reminded me instantly of Dante's Divine Comedy, which is a dense nest of of science, religion, art, politics, and history. Lots of bright, shiny things. Dante was a hoarder and a thief, an Italian magpie. Literary historians believe that he spent the last 4 years of his life in Ravenna, and while he was there, he completed the third section of the Divine Comedy, Paradiso, his evocation of the heavenly spheres. Over and over in Paradiso, Dante uses birds to convey the eternal beauty of the universe. Like the lark that soars in spacious skies, singing at first, then silent, satisfied, wrapped by the last sweet notes of its own song, so seemed the reflection of God's pleasure, by whose will all things become that which they truly are, he wrote. Like a magpie then, Dante plucked the larks, the mourning doves, and the magpies of Ravenna out of the pines, one by one, and placed them in the heaven of his poem. Ravenna offers further proof of Dante's magpiety. The interiors of the city's cathedrals and mausoleums glitter with shards of gold and glass and stone, stunning mosaics, which are themselves a gathering of bright, shiny things. They depict stars and angels and visions of infinity, all of which Dante pulled into the imagery of his poem. Again, like a winged thief, he took what he saw all around him, mixed it together, and now we marvel at what we call his inspiration. Obviously, the trick is in knowing what to pluck and how to mix it. Mosaic techniques date back to about the 3rd millennium BC, I learned, when monochrome pebbles were used to pave the courtyards of Crete's royal palaces. Usually the process began with a sinapa, a preliminary sketch, made using clay quarried from the city of Sinop in modern-day Turkey. Fresh plaster would then be applied over the sketch, after which artisans would press by hand single pebbles, chips of gold, and cut glass made of sand into the mortar, assuring a beautiful uneven symmetry, generating multiple reflections. It was the practice of the imperial courts to gather scholars from all fields and all countries within their cloistered walls. The mosaic's themes were intended to encompass the entirety of human knowledge, art informed by the sciences of astronomy, medicine, technology. In constructing his poem, during his last days in Ravenna, surrounded by birds and dazzling mosaics, Dante used a similar all-inclusive approach, which tells us something about the nature of inspiration. It draws from multiple sources. It's not a single idea, it's a put-together puzzle. From mosaic making, we can learn something else. It's necessary to obtain thorough knowledge of the skills of your craft, whether it's arranging cut glass and stones on the wall of a mausoleum or arranging verses on a page. Inspiration doesn't come to us in a flash from a lightning streak hurtling out of heaven. It comes from a process of wide self-education, openness to new places and experiences, and devoted work, sketching, planning, and resketching again and again. Earlier, I used the word magpiety to describe Dante's methods. I didn't invent that word. I first came across it in the work of a poet much more contemporary than Dante, the American Philip Levine. His poem, Magpiety, written in the early 1990s, begins this way. You pull over to the shoulder of the 2-lane road and sit for a moment, wondering where you were going in such a hurry. Already here, on the simplest level, Levine is using his poem to address inspiration. Stop hurrying, pull over, look around, inhale, take it all in. The poem's speaker notices a sudden flaring up ahead, a black-winged bird rising from nowhere, white patches underneath its wings. Startled, the speaker tells himself, you hear your own breath catching in your ears. Inspiration, caught breath, taking the world into your body, preparing yourself meditatively. I had heard all about magpies, the speaker says, how they snooped and meddled in the affairs of others, not birds, so much as people. If you dared to remove a wedding ring as you washed away the stickiness of love, he would enter the open window behind you, he, the magpie, and snatch up the ring in his hard beak and shoulder his way back into the currents of the world. In these lines, Levine reveals how he was inspired to write that very poem. He went meddling into the affairs of his own life, snatching bits and pieces of various experiences, driving on a two-lane road, stopping to watch a bird, remembering the stickiness of a love encounter from his youth, washing his hands afterwards, removing his wedding ring, the memory of which, of course, will remind him of his wedding, of his life with his wife and his children, and the poem is off and running, gathering momentum from all those bright, shiny things that Levine has mixed together here. Are they the right things? And has he mixed them nicely enough to create a satisfying work of art? I think we already glimpsed the beginning of an answer to this question in the poem's first line, because Levine prepares us for what lies ahead. You pull over to the shoulder of the two-lane road, he writes. The road, I think, is the key. Later, following the glimmering trails of memory, the poem comes to its central point, how one experience, one memory will always lead you to another. The contrasts among these experiences tell you how your life diverged at certain important intersections, how your life became your life. So as it turns out, every road is a two-lane road. You are 32 only once in your life, Levine writes. You can't go back, not to any spot along the path. You're there only once. So stop hurrying, pull over, look around. You'll never return as your current self to this same location. Everything is speaking or singing, the poem ends. Each bright, shiny thing is calling to you from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west. What will you pluck from the world? What will you mix it with? Where will you go with it? Be careful which writers you read. A writer like Philip Levine will drop glittering references in his work that will lead you like a greedy magpie from one thing to another. As it happens, Levine didn't invent the word magpiety either. He stole it from another poet, the Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz from Poland, who 3 decades before Levine wrote his poem, composed a piece called Magpiety. I walked through oak forests, a magpie was screeching, and I said, I shall never achieve a magpie's heart, flight that always renews just when coming down. In these lines, we glimpse further qualities of inspiration. Drawn by something bright and shiny on the ground, the bird comes down, but it doesn't stop moving. At the instant it plucks what it wants, it's starting to soar again. It's not thinking, it's not calculating, it's not worrying how this new treasure chip will mix with other stuff. The bird is operating on pure energy. Not the hurry of anxiety, but the motion of excitement generated by the inspiring object. The creature is ascending. Magpiety, piety. It implies heavenly movement. There's something sacred in this stealing. In Miłosz's lines, we hear, as we did in Levine's poem, a sense of regret, of lost opportunity. I shall never achieve a magpie's heart. The poet seems to have missed some crucial chance, the right turn on the two-lane road, perhaps. You're 32 only once. You only get one moment to pluck the shiny object, and then that moment is gone. Perhaps this is the sacred quality in the magpie's act of thievery, the recognition that this glimmering object, this beautiful thing that caught your eye, won't be here later to grace this spot. If you don't take it now, it will be lost to you, maybe lost to others. Perhaps the plucking is not so much greed as a deep thirst for the abundance of the world, knowing that abundance can't last. I think that's as good a definition of inspiration as any. profound reverence for this moment that you breathe into your lungs before you're forced to exhale and breath leaves your body again. By its very nature, I think writing is elegiac, a song to what's passing away, an attempt to capture as permanently as possible in words that which will soon be lost in the fullness of time. Feelings, thoughts, events, people, places, things. Is elegy then our major source of inspiration? Is it why we pluck and hoard? I once got to meet Czesław Miłosz. I was teaching down the road at Oregon State, and he invited Miłosz to give a reading on campus. He flew into Portland, and we had 2 hours to drive down I-5. And during that time, I tried to engage this grand figure who knew so much more than I did and seen so much more of the world than I could ever imagine. He witnessed some of the most tumultuous moments of the 20th century. He was a Nobel laureate. He was a great man, I thought, almost as great as Dante. On top of everything else, he didn't speak English very well. I figured we were ready for a long drive. After about half an hour of silence, he said he hadn't eaten on the plane, he was hungry. Frantically, I wondered where to take him. The I-5 corridor doesn't offer many 5-star restaurants, the only establishments worthy of a great man. But just then, Miłosz spotted a yellow Denny's sign. I like very much Denny's. So I wound up eating a rubbery hamburger in a dirty plastic booth with one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, and he loved every minute of it. He was living in the moment. I was contemplating the sublime and the ridiculous, the great poet in the fast food joint. But maybe, in the context of what I'm talking about, if we look at it in the proper light, Denny's may offer another example into the nature of inspiration. Maybe it is that combination, that mixing of the cheap, glittering object and the soaring bird, the burger and the poet, the mundane and the majestic that captures the cracked, heartbreaking quality of this world we live in. Maybe it's only by mixing pieces that don't seem to fit that we begin to approach authenticity in our writing. Now that I've veered into personal anecdote, let me go a little further and mention a couple of my earliest literary inspirations. Charles Schulz, creator of the Peanuts comic strip, and the science fiction writer Ray Bradbury. Maybe it's not surprising that a boy in love with stories born in the United States in 1955 would count among his first inspirations Peanuts and Bradbury's paperbacks. Growing up in West Texas, I didn't get many chances to watch birds and be inspired by their calls, but I responded happily to Woodstock, Snoopy's little bird friend. I couldn't begin to imagine Dante's glittering heaven, but Bradbury's Mars was as real to me as the tumbleweeds out in the desert. Up to this point, I've been speaking of inspiration in pretty abstract terms to try to invoke the emotion of it, the emotions that prepare us and lead us to it. But let's go for a moment to West Texas, to my boyhood, to a place where joints like Denny's were all over the place. And maybe I'll try to lower the volume a little to a more practical level. What happens when we are inspired? Like the magpie, we want to grasp that thing that has moved us. And if we're writers, I think inevitably we're going to be inspired by other works of writing. And when that happens, our manner of grasping is to imitate. The worship of originality, of always making it new, in the words of Ezra Pound, I think can be damaging. Not only is there nothing wrong with imitation, it's the surest way to thoroughly learn the skills of our craft. A writer copying sentences is like a mosaicist making cinepas, rough sketches, on the way to the big picture. Philip Levine didn't think twice about stealing from Czesław Miłosz. If you're going to steal, and by God, steal from others. Now, by stealing, of course, I don't mean plagiarism. We heard how different Levine's poem sounded from Miłosz's. It's like the distance between the lark's titter and the morning dove's hum. It was the subject, the tone, the feeling of the older man's poem that Levine plucked for his work. By mixing these inspirations with images from his own life, he did, in fact, create something new. Remember how it worked. Initially, the magpie came from Milos, as did that melancholy reverie about losing opportunities. But once Levine had that bird in hand, what could he do with it? He could make it steal something. That's what magpies do. What could it steal? And there is where Levine's own life kicked into the poem, transforming the material snatched from the earlier poem. The wedding ring, bright and shiny, removed while washing his hands after making love, a specific memory of Levine's, evoking his lost youth, plugging the poem back into that melancholy feeling, lost chances, regret, the original inspiration, but I'm getting all abstract again, so I'm going to go back to West Texas. The desert, the dust in that desert, gave me asthma as a kid. I couldn't breathe much of the world into my body. So usually the best time of day for me was early morning, just after waking up, before the wind kicked up all that dirt and before I'd exerted myself into shortness of breath. So I'd sit at the kitchen table, eating the cereal my mother had set before me, reading Peanuts in the paper. Those 4-paneled comic strips were probably the first narratives I ever learned to read, and they delighted me, a little story each morning. That left to right march across the page, those tiny square panels, was a lesson in pacing, the release of information, one slow step at a time. It's a crucial insight into literary craft. And clearly this writer wasn't just trying to be funny. Charles Schulz sketched a consistent worldview, which even a young child could grasp. "Do you have your own room, Charlie Brown?" Lucy asks her friend one day. "Oh yes, I have a very nice room," Charlie Brown answers. "I hope you realize you won't always have your own room. Someday you'll get drafted or something, and you'll have to leave your room forever," Lucy says. Pause, next panel, and listen to the brilliant pacing here, Charlie Brown's very brief response to Lucy's big burst. "Why do you tell me things like that?" And here comes the kicker. "It's on a list I've made up for you. I call it Things You Might As Well Know." While I poured extra milk into my bowl and laughed at the joke, and Lucy's pleasure and her cruelty to Charlie Brown, his constant susceptibility to her manipulations, I suddenly felt the laughter catch in my throat. At the time I didn't know why, but with the advantage of hindsight and experience, I can see now that Schultz's joke set me up, just the way Lucy snared Charlie Brown. She's right, damn it. There's nothing really funny about what she's telling me. One way or the other, the future is going to change us, it's going to change the world and our circumstances in it, it's going to knock us out of our comfortable complacencies. You're 32, only once. When this particular strip first appeared in the paper, I was a boy. It was the 1960s, the Vietnam War was scaring the hell out of me on television news broadcasts every night. I believed the war would never end, that someday I'd be drafted. Lucy knew. How did she know? I believed I'd die in a Southeast Asian rice paddy. In 4 small panels and in just 68 mostly one-syllable words, Charlie Brown and Lucy had not only articulated a deep uneasiness I'd been feeling, they gave it a shape, pacing, rhythm, specific detail, a very nice room. Please let me keep my very nice room. And a tone, in this case gentle humor, that allowed me to actually pause and think about my fear rather than flinch from it. If you're not inspired by something like that, then you're not paying attention. Stop hurrying. Take it in. I did, and inspired, my response was to imitate Peanuts. Like thousands of kids all over the country at that time, I imagine, I wanted to make my own comic strip. As it happened, I had a friend who had older brothers. From these experienced boys, I'd heard them use the phrase one night, beer nuts. They'd used it while describing how they'd snuck into a tavern using fake IDs. They drank beer and ate bar snacks, which is what they called beer nuts. Now, to my 12-year-old Methodist West Texas mind, those words sounded thrillingly filthy. Subversive. And subversion was part of my inspiration. I think Peanuts somehow had instilled in me the knowledge that Part of the act of writing is a refusal to accept the world as it is, to overturn it, to remake it, to expose its hypocrisies and try to improve it. That's what Lucy does. Tucked into her cruelty to Charlie Brown is a helpful warning. The world's not always a happy place, Charlie Brown. Get ready. Now, of course, I see that titling my comic strip Beer Nuts was silly in a predictably adolescent way, but I can still appreciate the gears of inspiration behind that gesture. I was echoing the title of my source of inspiration in a kind of homage to it, but I distanced myself from it by subverting it. I was thumbing my nose at the world, announcing my intention to make it better by using language that seemed to me then slightly naughty. Each and every one of my Beer Nuts comic strips unfolded in exactly the same way. The main character, a boy modeled on Charlie Brown, spent the first 2 panels cherishing some object, a baseball glove, a transistor radio, a toy truck. In the 3rd panel, that cherished object managed to get broken or lost. Finally, in the 4th panel, the boy would shrug and say, "Oh well, I didn't want it anyway." You see that Peanuts had inspired me on a profound level because Lucy's fatalism obviously resonated with me deeply. I'd learned from Charles Schulz that writing, more than just being entertaining, had to project a coherent, committed worldview. And over time, the fact that every one of my strips moved toward the exact same punchline taught me something else about narrative, the need to keep raising the stakes. In the very last Beer Nuts strip I ever drew, the boy moved far beyond baseball gloves and toy trucks. One day, he accidentally runs over his baby sister with a lawnmower. Oh well, I didn't want her anyway. Nowhere to go after that. Our first reading passions lead us to seek signs of them everywhere. In the moon-obsessed 1960s, with the American astronauts posing as sex symbols on the covers of Life magazine, it wasn't unusual for boys like me to devour science fiction. Naturally, I gravitated to Ray Bradbury. But it's only now, as an adult, that I see it wasn't the rocket ships or the magical elixirs that drew me to the stories in his paperbacks. It was his tone, his worldview, not so dissimilar to Charles Schulz's. Though Peanuts and Ray Bradbury may not appear to share much, I had discovered a literary sensibility by finding the commonalities in their writing. Be careful which writers you read. Inspiration draws from multiple sources. With Charlie Brown and the Martians, I see now I was starting to form a kind of personal mosaic. Early on, I understood that Bradbury's stories may have been set in the future, but his heroes were average boys longing to escape their small Midwestern towns and follow their dreams to some far-flung place at the edges of their imaginations. That many families from my part of the country, known as the Dust Bowl in the days of the Great Depression, had made such a journey meant that Bradbury's stories pulsed for me with deep familiarity. I'd heard those Depression tales from my grandfather and great-grandfather. I'd heard the elders in my family speak of the California fruit fields where Okies who had lost their farms to the dust storms went looking for work, as if those fields were as magical as Martian canals. I saw that Bradbury's stories were less about aliens and wormholes and time warps than American restlessness. His stories were about social strictures, social class, and the daring it took to imagine one's way out of poverty. In his beautiful book, City of Ports, Mike Davis puts it this way: Bradbury's Martian Chronicles revolves around contradictions between the westering quest for new frontiers and poignant nostalgia for small-town America. In a sense, Bradbury took the angst of the dislocated Midwesterner in Los Angeles and projected it as extraterrestrial destiny. The Earth as a small, dull town, Los Angeles as Mars. Bradbury really understood the twisting paths of his inspiration. And in my development as a reader, it was, I think, a natural progression from Peanuts to the Martian Chronicles. Bradbury's space and time travelers displayed the constant optimism of Charlie Brown, even as they encountered the harsh realities Lucy warned him about. Later, with Bradbury in my head, I could pause, look around, and understand my own time and place much better than I had before. Eventually, Bradbury helped me see how the massive energy of migrants from Texas and Oklahoma winding their way to California had, in the 1950s and 60s, fashioned gadgets in the West's burgeoning aerospace industry that did propel us all into the future, to the moon and beyond. It was just as Bradbury had predicted. The future was born from the past, from childhood longings in small Midwestern towns. This would be one of the subjects I would write about one day, and I owe that inspired vision to yellowed, torn paperbacks bearing the name Ray Bradbury. My own career as a writer has been a mosaic of subjects, styles, genres, and obsessions. I've learned to accept the fact that inspiration can come from anywhere, and it will usually take me by surprise. If this experience has led me to any practical approach to writing, it's this. Even if you are the type of writer who likes to outline a story before starting a project, even if you like to know where you're going before you begin, it is essential to stay vulnerable, open to the possibility of being bushwhacked by inspiration and bundled off in an entirely new direction. You have to be willing to go wherever that inspiration takes you. You have to be flexible and aware and give yourself over to those bird calls at dawn. Maybe I can offer one final illustration of what I'm trying to get at from my work. In recent years, I've been writing literary biographies. One of my subjects, Joan Didion, as Lisa said, she once wrote, "I don't know what I think until I write it." For Didion, then, the deepest inspiration arises not from the world or even from her subjects, but from the act of writing itself. That mind-to-hand coordination of typing words, stringing together phrases, forming sentences whose music, open or closed vowels, hard or soft consonants, leads you to say something you hadn't intended, leads you to reveal something you didn't even know you knew, and inspires you toward a much profounder level of writing than you thought you were capable of. This was the case for me a few years ago when I began to write a biography of Joseph Heller, most famously the author of the novel Catch-22. I'd read Catch-22 when I was a West Texas teenager, still trembling at the prospect of being drafted and fighting in Vietnam. Heller's novel was a bitterly funny anti-war book, and it suited my rebellious adolescent mind. Years later, when I began to write the biography, I thought my love of Catch-22 would be inspiration enough to propel me through Heller's life story. I outlined his chronology, his childhood, his stint in the army, and so on. From his letters and from interviews I'd conducted, I collected several anecdotes from which to make a narrative. But the early drafts of the book seemed drab to me, my own prose dull. I was waiting for a spark, one magnificent detail or event from Heller's life to stand out and inspire me into grasping how to pull his story together. And finally, it was the writing itself, that dogged task of placing one sentence next to another, that made the difference. In writing biographies, I've learned that when you trace the life of a person, you really have to depend on transitions. Getting from childhood to adolescence requires a then. Then one day, puberty hit. Probing a subject's emotional complexities often requires a but. But for all his maturity, he remained a little boy inside, longing for his mother. So slowly but steadily, wrestling with transitions like then and but, I began to grasp Joseph Heller at the level of simple grammar, a basic narrative shape, being strung together with ands and buts and thens, which finally would coalesce into a bigger narrative. I began to see that Heller's life was one formulaic story after another, utterly familiar in the way fairy tales are, and wildly, surprisingly delightful for all the reasons genres become popular in the first place. In Heller's case, we begin with the immigrant story. He was the child of Russian parents fleeing the Tsar in the 1920s. Fatherless early, he experienced the old world's typical clashes with the new in a land not so full of opportunities after all. Then, note the transition, then The war story bursts upon the page. As a soldier in combat, he nearly dies in the plexiglass nose cone of a B-25 over Avignon, France during the Second World War. After recovering from his trauma, he returns to a prosperous America, and his life conforms to another narrative formula, that of the faceless individual battling corporate bureaucracy. Along the way, we get the medical story, the courtroom drama, and somewhere in there he writes Catch-22. Heller's inspiration was the string of experiences that led him to the nose cone of that B-25. What gave my story momentum was my excitement at discovering that string and then probing the grammatical and narrative shape of its unwinding. For me, Joseph Heller became quite literally a series of sentences, a grammatical rhythm, a problem of arranging. So throughout this talk this morning, I've been stressing as one of the core principles of inspiration, the need to stop and look and take in this moment, to pluck bright, shiny objects from the ground before they get lost. Naturally then, when the New York Times published an article just recently titled, "We Aren't Meant to Live in the Moment," it caught my eye. Note the cliche, by the way. How many times do we say something caught our eye? In spite of Milos's denial, we all have the heart of a magpie. The writers of that Times piece, John Tierney and Martin Seligman, point out that what distinguishes our species from birds, say, or any animal, is an ability that scientists are just beginning to appreciate. We contemplate the future. Our singular foresight creates civilization and sustains society. Without looking ahead, without busying ourselves with multiple plans, we fail to obtain wisdom. The Times cites scientific studies. When making plans, people reported higher levels of happiness and lower levels of stress than at other times, presumably because planning turns a chaotic mass of concerns into an organized sequence. Well, if on the surface this point of view appears to contradict my advice to live in the moment, a closer examination of it suggests it's merely a refinement of magpiety. Listen again. Planning turns a chaotic mass of concerns into an organized sequence. Sounds like a narrative to me. From the raw materials of the world, chaotic mass of concerns, we make an organized sequence, a satisfying shape. With our magpie hearts beating thunderously in our chests, we can't help but pluck from that chaos, that is, select from it the things that attract us. And then we arrange them in a manner that aids and delights us further. I would add to this mix the elegiac impulse I mentioned earlier, the desire to save what would otherwise be lost. A saved object is the past's contribution to the future. Quite literally, it reserves a former cast-off for some projected use. Sustained attention, selection, arrangement, the result is salvage and sustainment. A formula for what art is and does and what inspires it. My mother used to tell a story about me. When I was a very small child, before I'd learned to write, before I could even read Peanuts, she would take me to the zoo, she said. Inside the aviary, I'd stand enthralled before the big flitting parrots, the mynas, and the jackdaws, but before a few minutes had passed, I would ask to be taken home. "Don't you like the pretty birds?" my mother would ask. I insisted that I did. My request to leave confused her. Back home, I'd reach for pencil and paper and draw the birds I had just watched. My mother had misunderstood me at the zoo. My enchantment with the birds had not dissipated, it had simply moved from external stimulus to emotional reverie. I'd taken in a piece of the world, a piece I somehow knew would fly away, and now I wanted to find a way to keep it. From my vantage point today, I know that what I really wanted was to keep my mother forever, and already I knew I couldn't. On some very primitive level, long before I could articulate the impulse, I had experienced inspiration and the desire to make a work of art. There's nothing unique or special or magical about any of this. We all do it, all the time. Last year, when I awoke at dawn in Ravenna and listened to the birds of paradise, I thought of that section of the Divine Comedy where Dante travels to the moon to commune with the souls of the saved. At first, he doesn't know what he's seeing. The dead spirits are gossamer, opaque, shimmering like images in the surface of still water, or bits of cut glass in a mosaic. He believes he must be looking at reflections, so he turns around, but nothing's there. It struck me that morning in Ravenna that much of the time we move through the world barely registering what we see, as if glimpsing reflections in windows as we walk past swiftly, proceeding without another thought. How many times have I heard birds early in the morning? And yet how many times have I actually paused to listen to them? What makes a particular object stand out to us, suddenly acquiring enough brightness to catch our eye or our ear, is a complex and deeply personal matter. Your trash will be my treasure, and vice versa. But the point is, there's no scarcity of stuff to satisfy our magpie hearts. You were 32 only once, or 44, or 65, or 90. Grab it now. Start shaping your nest or your story or your poem. Life is a divine comedy filled with glittering cast-offs and inspiration. It's as easy and profound as breathing. Thank you and have a terrific day today.
Tracy to give us about 5-10 minutes of Q&A. So if you've got questions for him about his books or about this idea of inspiration and finding inspiration in objects and experiences, we'll take a few questions.
It's a early morning.
Do you have anything like a specific sort of like objects or inspiration that draws you, like nature or something like that?
I think for me personally, the question was, do I have a specific kind of object that tends to draw me? And for me personally, music is a big source because language strikes me as a form of music. And I tend not to have a visual imagination the way many writers do. And I tend not to start with character. I wish I could, but my own predilection is rhythm and pacing and the kinds of things that you hear in music. I'm a very bad amateur drummer, and I think rather than being a good drummer, what's important to me about that is that I've learned simply to love rhythm, and I think I apply that to my writing. So that's one of the shiny objects for me is the sound of music. What's yours?
My cello.
Your cello, okay, so you've got the same impulse. What's fascinating, and maybe during the day you can all share with each other, I mean, I love it when writers get together and you hear what tends to inspire other people, because we are all so very different. We all start from different places and we write for different reasons. And of course, as you continue to write over many years, your reasons for writing will also change, and the things that draw you will change. So it's a fascinating, constantly moving process.
How did you choose Joan Didion as the subject of your biography? Did you choose that?
How did I choose Joan Didion as a subject? I go back to what I was just saying, rhythm. Joan Didion is one of those writers whose the rhythms of her sentences are hypnotic to me. They got into my head when I was very young, when I first read her, and I found my own thoughts kind of marching to her rhythm. So she was always, for that reason, a very important writer to me when I first read her, probably when I was in college. The other thing that drew me to her was that as a journalist, she witnessed most of the major events, or many of the major events of our lifetime. The big public events and social events and the upheaval of the 1960s, which shaped, to a large degree, my generation. So writing about her allowed me to write about those things as well and explore them for myself. So she was a natural subject for me. Yes, Marcia.
Do you think your writing process, sort of from the early magpie-ishness to the actual act of sort of composing a draft or something, has changed from when you were a young writer to now? It's a large question.
So the question was, has my writing process changed from the moment of that inspiration to actually drafting things? And I would say yes. As a very young beginning writer, I think, like many young writers, without really realizing it, I think I wanted to show off, what I knew and what I could do. I was delighted with, the power I discovered in language and what I could do. And so I was very focused on, flashy phrasing and trying to make my language sexy and exciting and all this kind of stuff. And as I've gotten older, I'm much less interested in that. I think my language has gotten simpler and plainer, calling less attention to itself. I'm more interested in the substance of what I'm talking about rather than the style and the surface. That's one thing. The other thing is I tend to write fast. I tend to go with that moment of inspiration. When I get excited by something, I discover a subject, Joan Didion or music or whatever it is, that has excited me that day, and I want to sit down and write about it. I don't outline in advance. I don't try to think it through. I really work fast. I want to keep that moment of excitement going as long as I can. So as a result, my early drafts are really terrible, really sloppy. And I just give into that. I don't try to revise as I write those early drafts. I want to kick out something fast. And that includes novels as well, longer pieces. Just stay with it for however many weeks or months or whatever. Kick the thing out. That's my process. And then you've got time to go back and refine it as many times as you wish. The last thing I will add, as I've gotten older, I think I've also become less concerned with literary categories. There's always a debate about what's the difference between fiction and nonfiction, and how is poetry different from prose, I really find myself bored with those debates at this point. To me, writing is writing, language is language, your inspiration is what drives you. I don't really worry that much about what I'm calling this thing I'm working on, whether it's a novel, a novella, a short story, a poem, whatever it is, I'm just going with it. So I try to relax about those categories. Now, when it comes to marketing something and publishing, you are forced into categories, and at that point you have to worry about it. But when writing, I don't really care so much. So yeah, get inspired and work fast. That's my approach.
So last question.
Yes. Yes, sure.
What drew you to writing and literature?
What drew me to writing and literature? Quite honestly, I think it was seeing my name in print, but it wasn't really my name. I was named after my grandfather. He was also called Tracy Daugherty, and he was a politician in Oklahoma. He was a very precocious public speaker. So when he was very young, 10 years old, his father would quite literally take him around Oklahoma, place him on soapboxes, and teach him speeches. And he would give political speeches as a 10-year-old kid. And when I was a child, I saw these posters. They said, "Come here, Tracy Daugherty, wonderful public speaker." And I thought, wow, I like seeing my name. But also, because he was a speaker, he wrote his own speeches. So the first writing I was ever exposed to, really, even before Peanuts, I really couldn't read it, but I would see my grandfather writing speeches, and I was just really, really drawn to that idea, the power of language.
To the book table now, so he'll be there for signing. Our next session doesn't start until 10:20. I did want to mention the raffle is going to be held at the end of lunch. It's pretty quick, so get those raffle tickets soon. I think Barbara probably has something for me.
I was just going to say one thing. You might look at the Twitter post because we have a graphic note taker here putting things up there about the talk. So if you want to see some quick reviews and impressions, you can look on that. sort of.
Yeah, if you were here last year, Barbara's son, Moss Drake, is an artist, and he is doing some drawing and visual note-taking.
Yeah.
And really cool things. You may have seen them on social media last year, but if not,